I sat in my sister's wedding procession, draped in silk and lies, the weight of the veil pressed against my forehead like a crown of thorns. My heart hammered so violently I feared everyone could hear it. The guards flanking the carriage, the servants who prepared me, even the alpha waiting at the end of this doomed journey. Just one night, that's what I told myself. Survive one night and by dawn I'd vanish like smoke. But the moment I stepped into that grand hall and caught the scent of him, I knew I'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. His presence hit me like a physical force, rich and overwhelming, designed to make omegas submit. My instincts screamed at me to drop to my knees, to bare my neck, to surrender everything I was trying to hide. This was wrong. All of it. I came here to save my sister from a fate she couldn't endure, not to lose myself in the process. The guards led me through corridors that seemed endless, each step echoing my growing dread. When we finally stopped before massive oak doors, they swung open to reveal a room bathed in candlelight. And there he stood, the blind alpha warlord my family had offered my sister to as tribute. Lawrence. He introduced himself as though his name were a gift, his voice so quiet it felt like he was reading my thoughts rather than speaking them. I adjusted my veil, making sure every strand of hair remained hidden. If he discovered I was male, the treaty would shatter. Both our families would face destruction. He moved toward me with unsettling grace, his fingers tracing patterns in the air as though mapping my presence through invisible threads. My breath caught when he paused just inches away, his head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring. The gesture seemed predatory despite his blindness. You smell different, he said. Time stopped. My lungs refused to work. Different how? Could he detect the deception already? I forced myself to think rationally. Nervous bride. That's all. Just a nervous bride on her wedding night. But even as I clung to that explanation, I knew the truth. Lawrence might be blind, but his remaining senses were razor sharp, honed by years of compensating for what he'd lost. He could probably hear my pulse racing, feel the tremor in my breathing, smell the cold sweat gathering at my temples. His hand shot out with frightening precision, wrapping around my wrist. The touch sent electricity up my arm. What's your name? The question hung between us like a blade. My mind went blank. Should I use my real name or my sister's? The pause stretched too long. I'm Elias, I stammered, then immediately tried to soften it. They call me Eli. It wasn't entirely false, just dangerously close to the truth. I watched his face for any reaction, but his expression remained unreadable. He released my wrist and stepped back, putting measured distance between us. Eli, he repeated slowly, as if tasting each syllable. That's not a woman's name. Panic clawed at my throat. I scrambled for an explanation. It's a nickname, short for Eliana. The lie left my mouth before I could second guess it. Please let him believe it. Please don't let this unravel before it even begins. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A low, cold sound that raised every hair on my body. Interesting was all he said before turning and walking to the far side of the room. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Did he know? Or was he merely suspicious? The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. I perched on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, while Lawrence settled on the opposite side. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. Just lay there in perfect stillness, as though this were completely normal. I couldn't sleep. How could I? Every small sound made me flinch. The wind against the windows, the settling of the old mansion, the distant call of night birds. My mind raced through escape plans, each more desperate than the last. When dawn finally began to lighten the sky, I carefully rose from the bed. Perhaps I could slip away now while he slept. I'd taken 3 steps toward the door when his voice cut through the quiet. If you want to leave, the door is unlocked. I spun around. He hadn't moved from his position, but somehow I knew he'd been awake all along, tracking my every movement. The statement wasn't permission, it was a challenge. Would I run like a coward, or would I see this through? My feet refused to carry me forward. One part of me screamed to flee while I still could. But another part, a part I didn't fully understand yet, whispered that running would be the greatest mistake of my life. I returned to the bed without a word. As the room filled with morning light, I studied Lawrence's profile. Strong jawline, aristocratic nose, dark hair that fell across his forehead in careless waves. He looked every inch the warrior his reputation claimed, scarred, hardened, dangerous. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name. A loneliness. Perhaps. A weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "You didn't leave," he observed, still not opening his eyes. "No," I whispered. "I didn't." "Why not?" The question demanded honesty I wasn't ready to give. I didn't know why I stayed. Fear of being caught? A sense of duty to my family? Or something more complicated, more terrifying? The inexplicable pull I felt toward this blind alpha who saw through every lie I told. "I made a promise," I finally said. It was vague enough to be safe, specific enough to sound sincere. Lawrence sat up then, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Even his smallest movements carried an economy of motion that spoke of years of combat training. "Promises," he mused. "Such fragile things. They break so easily under pressure." "Not all of them," I countered before I could stop myself. He smiled. A real smile this time, not the cold laugh from before. "We'll see." He stood and walked toward the door with the same unsettling accuracy as before, never once reaching out to orient himself. Just before leaving, he paused. "There's breakfast in the dining room. You should eat. You'll need your strength." "For what?" I wanted to ask, but he was already gone. I sank onto the bed, trembling with relief and residual fear. I'd survived the night. But as I sat there in the empty room, surrounded by the lingering scent of the alpha who'd somehow become my husband, I realized survival wasn't the victory I'd imagined. Because leaving was no longer possible. Not because the doors were locked or guards prevented it, but because something had shifted inside me during those long, silent hours. I'd come here to sacrifice myself for my sister. Instead, I'd stumbled into something far more complicated. And despite every rational instinct telling me to run, to escape before things got worse, I knew with absolute certainty that I would stay. At least for now. Morning sunlight transformed Lawrence from a shadowy figure into something startlingly real. I watched from the bedroom doorway as he moved through the mansion, issuing commands to guards, reviewing reports brought by messengers, handling the affairs of his territory with absolute authority. He never once acknowledged his blindness, never hesitated, never stumbled, never showed the slightest uncertainty. It was almost inhuman, this level of control. And somehow I'd become part of what he controlled. I maintained my disguise throughout that first day, the veil, the jewelry, keeping my voice soft and high. But when Lawrence returned to our shared space that evening and positioned himself directly in front of me, I understood that costume alone wouldn't protect me. Deception ran deeper than fabric. It lived in scent, in posture, in the rhythm of a heartbeat. And Lawrence seemed capable of reading all those invisible signals. "You haven't eaten," he stated. I jumped at the observation. How could he possibly know that? I wasn't hungry. I lied. Even as my stomach betrayed me with a quiet growl, he gestured toward the table where servants had left covered dishes. "Sit. Eat." The words carried undeniable command. I obeyed, settling into the chair and lifting the covers to reveal an elaborate meal. Every bite felt like a test. I sensed him listening to the soft clink of silverware, the pace of my chewing, the subtle sounds of swallowing. He was gathering data, building a profile of who I really was beneath the wedding clothes. Then he moved behind me. I froze mid-bite, fork suspended halfway to my mouth. His presence at my back felt oppressive, weighted with unspoken questions. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" His breath stirred the veil I still wore. My hand shook, making the fork rattle against the plate. "Treaty," I managed. "My family needed protection from rival clans." Silence stretched between us. Then his palm settled on my shoulder, gentle at first, testing my reaction. "You're lying." The words were barely audible. "I can feel it. In your pulse. In your scent. In the way your muscles tense when I'm near." Terror and something else, something dangerously close to excitement, flooded through me. If he already knew, why hadn't he called for guards? Why continue this charade? I forced myself to hold still under his touch. "I'm not lying, I'm frightened." At least that part was true. "Good." He withdrew his hand. "Fear is the only honest thing you've shown me so far." He left the room without another word. leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. The following days established a pattern. Lawrence disappeared into his duties, war councils where strategies were debated, political negotiations that determined the fate of territories, brutal training sessions in the courtyard where he faced multiple opponents simultaneously. I wandered the vast mansion like a ghost, trying to understand the world I'd stumbled into. Servants treated me with wary respect, never quite meeting my eyes. Guards watched me constantly, though whether to protect or imprison remained unclear. Every night, Lawrence returned. We shared that bedroom in tense silence, neither of us acknowledging the strange intimacy of it. He never touched me again, never demanded anything, never even spoke unless absolutely necessary. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like waiting for a storm that never quite broke. On the third evening, he summoned me to the library. I hadn't even known the mansion contained one. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with more books than I'd ever seen in one place. Lawrence stood among them, fingers trailing across leather spines as though reading titles through touch alone. "Do you read?" he asked without preamble. I nodded before remembering he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes." My voice came out steadier than expected. He pulled a volume from the shelf and extended it toward me with unnerving accuracy. Then read to. Confusion made me hesitate. Why? For the first time since I'd met him, his expression softened into something approaching genuine warmth. "Because I want to hear your real voice, not the performance you've been giving everyone else." My heart plummeted. I took the book with trembling hands and opened to a random page. The words swam before my eyes for a moment before I forced myself to focus. I began reading, my voice shaky at first, gradually smoothing into the natural cadence I'd been suppressing. Lawrence settled into a chair, eyes closed, completely still except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. When I finished the chapter, I closed the book carefully. The silence felt different now, charged with meaning I couldn't quite interpret. "You read like a boy," Lawrence said finally. The book slipped from my numb fingers. "I don't." He raised one hand, stopping my panic denial. "Don't lie again, Eli." He used my actual name, the one I'd foolishly given him that first night. Not the feminine version I'd claimed it was short for, but the male name I'd revealed in a moment of weakness. "I've known since you walked into this mansion." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. He'd known from the beginning. Every moment of the past 3 days had been a test, a game, a way of seeing whether I'd eventually trust him with the truth. "What happens now?" I whispered. Lawrence stood, navigating the library shelves with practiced ease. "Now? Now we continue as we have been. You keep pretending to be a bride. I keep pretending to believe you. And we see how long this arrangement can last before one of us breaks." "That's insane." "Perhaps." He moved toward the door, then paused. "But consider this. If I wanted to expose you, I would have done it already. If I wanted to void the treaty and send you back in disgrace, I could have. The fact that you're still here should tell you something." "Tell me what?" He didn't answer. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone in the library surrounded by thousands of stories, none of them as complicated as my own. I sank into the chair he'd vacated, mind reeling. Lawrence knew everything, yet he'd chosen to let the deception continue. Why? What possible advantage could he gain from harboring an imposter? The treaty still held, technically, as long as no one else discovered the truth. But surely keeping such a secret put him at risk too. Unless he wanted this. Unless for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. Having me here, real, flawed, dangerously inappropriate me, served some purpose beyond political alliance. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, as I sat there in the fading light, I felt the strangest sense of relief. No more pretending, at least not with him. Whatever happened next, at least one person in this vast, lonely mansion knew exactly who I was, and he'd chosen to keep me anyway. Lawrence never confronted me directly about what he knew. Instead, his approach shifted in subtle ways. He began assigning me tasks, organizing the library, walking the garden paths, joining him for dinner where we'd discuss everything except the obvious truth hanging between us. It felt like training, though for what purpose I couldn't determine. Each activity seemed designed to test different aspects of my character. How did I handle responsibility? Could I maintain composure under scrutiny? Would I eventually crack under the pressure of maintaining two identities simultaneously? I spent hours watching him from my window. The training grounds offered a clear view, and I found myself drawn there repeatedly, observing as Lawrence sparred with his soldiers. His blindness should have been a devastating handicap in combat, yet he moved with fluid precision that defied logic. He anticipated attacks before they came, positioning his blade exactly where opponents' strikes would land. Once I watched him disarm 3 men in rapid succession using nothing but sound and spatial awareness. The display was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. "You've been watching me." I nearly fell off the window seat. Lawrence stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a slight smile playing at his lips. How long had he been there? How had he entered without me hearing? I wasn't. The denial died on my lips when I saw his expression. He knew. Of course he knew. He probably knew every time I'd stood at this window, every moment I'd spent observing him instead of hiding away like a proper bride should. "Don't worry." He entered the room, moving with that unsettling confidence. "I like being watched by you. It means you're curious. Curiosity is far more interesting than fear." Heat flooded my face. "Tell me something, Eli." He stopped a few feet away, head tilted as though studying me despite his useless eyes. "What did you think when they told you to marry me?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I could lie, deflect, maintain the pretense, but something about the way he asked, vulnerable beneath the authority, made me choose honesty instead. I was angry. It felt like being sacrificed to save people who should have protected me. And now? The question hung in the air between us. I took a shaky breath. "Now I think perhaps fate has better plans than any of us realized." His expression flickered with something I couldn't name. Satisfaction? Relief? Before I could analyze it further, he turned and left without another word, leaving me to wonder whether I'd said too much or not enough. That night, I woke to the sensation of someone holding my wrist. My eyes flew open to find Lawrence sitting on the edge of my bed, fingers pressed against my pulse point. Moonlight streaming through the window cast his face in silver shadows, making him look almost otherworldly. "Your scent changes when you sleep," he murmured. "It becomes softer, more honest. All the walls you build during the day crumble when you're unconscious." I tried to pull away, but his grip remained firm without being painful. "You don't have to hide anymore, Eli. Not from me." "I'm not hiding." Even I didn't believe the words. He shook his head slowly. "You are. From me, from yourself, from the bond that's forming whether we want it to or not." Bond. The word sent panic shooting through my veins. Bonds between alphas and omegas were supposed to be sacred, permanent, unbreakable. They weren't supposed to form between two males, weren't supposed to happen in arranged marriages built on deception. "I can't bond with you. I'm not your omega. I'm not even supposed to be here." His thumb traced small circles on my wrist, the touch surprisingly gentle. "Then what are you?" The question held genuine curiosity rather than accusation. I had no answer. Was I an imposter? A sacrifice? A foolish boy playing dress-up in his sister's life? Or something else entirely? Something I wasn't ready to name or acknowledge. "Go to sleep, Eli." He released my wrist and stood. "We'll continue this conversation when you're ready to hear the answers you're avoiding." He returned to his side of the bed, and I lay there in the darkness, unable to close my eyes. My wrist still tingled where he touched me, and his scent, pine and smoke and something uniquely him, filled my lungs with every breath. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I didn't want to hide from him. Somewhere between that first terrifying night and this moment, my feelings had shifted from pure survival instinct to something far more dangerous. I wanted him to know me, the real me, not the bride I was pretending to be or even the frightened boy who'd agreed to this insane plan. I wanted him to see past all the layers and understand who I actually was beneath everything. But that kind of vulnerability required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. What if he rejected the truth? What if knowing me fully made him regret keeping my secret? What if the game he was playing had rules I didn't understand and revealing myself completely would somehow break them? I turned onto my side, watching his motionless form in the darkness. He wasn't asleep. I could tell by his breathing. He was aware of me just as I was aware of him, both of us lying in the dark, pretending rest while our minds raced with unspoken thoughts. "Lawrence?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes." "Why are you doing this? Why not just expose me and be done with it? The silence stretched so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because everyone in my life sees only what I show them. The blind warlord, the fearsome alpha, the political asset. But you see me differently. You watch me train and see beauty instead of violence. You read to me and forget to be afraid. You're real in a way nothing else in my life has been for years. Why would I destroy that? His words settled over me like a blanket, warm and unexpectedly comforting. We were both trapped in roles we never chose, both pretending to be something we weren't for the sake of others' expectations. Perhaps that's why this strange arrangement worked. We recognized the performance in each other because we were both giving one. I didn't respond, and he didn't seem to expect me to. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, and my last conscious thought was that maybe, just maybe, this disaster I'd stumbled into might somehow transform into something worth keeping. When dawn arrived, everything would return to the careful dance we'd been performing. But for now, in the quiet hours before sunrise, we could exist in this small bubble of honesty. Two people who understood each other in ways neither had anticipated, bound together by secrets that should have driven us apart but somehow brought us closer instead. The messenger arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and his face pale with urgency. I watched from the upper gallery as Lawrence received the news in the main hall. Even from a distance, I could see the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared, his jaw tightened. War was coming. The treaty that had brought me here had also painted a target on Lawrence's territory. Rival clans saw our alliance as a threat to their power, and they decided to eliminate that threat before it could solidify. Within the hour, the mansion transformed into a military fortress. Soldiers checked their weapons with grim efficiency. Guards took positions at every entrance, every window, every vulnerable point in the stone walls. I remained in my room watching the preparations with growing dread. Part of me believed I'd be safe here, protected by thick walls and trained warriors. That part was naive. The first explosion shook the entire structure. I fell to my knees as the floor bucked beneath me, plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Chandeliers swayed violently, their crystals chiming like warning bells. In that moment of chaos, something inside me snapped. I tore off the veil I'd been wearing, stripped away the feminine robes, and pulled on the simple clothes I'd hidden at the bottom of my trunk. Clothes that had belonged to the real me before this masquerade began. If I was going to die, I refused to do it dressed in lies. I'd barely finished when the door burst open. Lawrence stood there, blood splattered across his face and chest, sword gripped in his hand. For a moment we just stared at each other, him seeing me truly for the first time without pretense. Me seeing the warrior beneath the composed alpha. Stay here, his voice carried absolute command, brooking no argument. No. The word escaped before I could think better of it. This was the first time I directly refused him. I'm not useless. He drove his sword into the floor with enough force to crack the stone, then crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. His hands cupped my face with surprising gentleness given the violence surrounding us. I know you're not useless, Eli. But if you die, this treaty dies with you, and so does everything we've been building. I'd never seen vulnerability in him before. This blind alpha warlord who faced armies without flinching was trembling as he held me, his forehead pressed against mine for just a heartbeat. Please, stay. I meant to obey. Truly, I did. But when the next explosion tore through the eastern wall and smoke began flooding the corridors, instinct overrode obedience. I couldn't hide in safety while Lawrence risked everything below. I ran toward the chaos instead of away from it. The main hall had become a battlefield. Soldiers clashed with invaders, steel ringing against steel, shouts and screams echoing off the walls. I spotted an injured guard dragging himself toward cover, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Without thinking, I ran to help, getting my shoulder under his arm and hauling him toward relative safety. That's when I saw the enemy soldier charging toward me, blade raised for a killing strike. My entire body locked up. I had no training, no weapon, no way to defend myself or the wounded man depending on me. Time seemed to slow as that sword descended. Then Lawrence was there. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed his presence until he materialized between me and death. His own blade moved in a precise arc that disarmed the attacker and sent him crashing to the floor. Before I could process what had happened, Lawrence's hand clamped around my wrist, yanking me behind him. What did I say? His voice shook with fury and fear in equal measure. You should have stayed upstairs. I grabbed his free hand, holding on with desperate strength. I couldn't, not when you're out here bleeding and fighting alone. Something shifted between us in that moment. Something that went beyond the careful dance we'd been performing for weeks. This wasn't about treaties or arrangements or political necessity. This was raw and real and terrifying in its intensity. Then don't leave my side. He pulled me closer, positioning me at his back. Not for a second. The battle raged for 2 more hours. I stayed pressed against Lawrence, moving when he moved, learning to anticipate his shifts in direction. He fought like a man possessed, defending not just his territory but something far more precious. Me. Every strike, every parry, every calculated risk served to keep danger away from where I stood. When the last invader finally fell or fled, silence descended like a blanket. Lawrence swayed on his feet and I caught him before he could fall. His shoulder bore a deep gash, blood soaking through his shirt and dripping onto the floor. Come on. I got under his good arm, supporting his weight. Let me help you. We made it back to our room somehow, my legs shaking with exhaustion and delayed terror. I sat him on the bed and went searching for medical supplies. My hands trembled as I cut away his ruined shirt, revealing the extent of the damage. The wound was deep but clean. No poison, no embedded debris. You should have run. His voice was quiet, almost contemplative. When the fighting started, you should have escaped and never looked back. I threaded a needle, sterilizing it over a candle flame. Is that what you wanted? For me to run? No. The admission came with a bitter laugh. But it would have been smarter, safer. I began stitching the wound, trying to keep my touch steady. Since when have I done the smart thing? He caught my wrist midway through the 4th stitch. His blind eyes found my face with uncanny accuracy. Why did you come down? Really, I could have deflected, made a joke, found some practical excuse. Instead, I chose honesty. Because I care about you. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe that first night when you didn't expose me, or in the library when you asked me to read, or during one of 100 small moments since. But somewhere along the way you stopped being the alpha I was forced to marry and became someone I couldn't bear to lose. Lawrence didn't respond with words. He simply raised his other hand to my cheek, thumb brushing away tears I hadn't realized I was crying. His touch was reverent, as though I were something precious and break. I finished the stitches in silence, then wrapped clean bandages around his shoulder. When I was done, he pulled me down beside him on the blood-stained sheets. We lay there together as dawn light began filtering through the damaged walls. Neither of us speaking, both of us processing how close we'd come to losing something we'd barely begun to acknowledge. The war had ended. But the real battle, the one happening inside my chest, where my heart kept insisting this damaged, dangerous alpha was somehow exactly where I belonged. That battle was just beginning, and I had no idea if I was strong enough to win it. The days following the attack passed in a strange haze of normalcy and change. Workers repaired the damaged walls while soldiers recovered from their injuries. The mansion slowly returned to order, but everything felt fundamentally different. Lawrence began including me in his war councils, asking my opinion on strategies and defenses. At first I kept silent, convinced I had nothing valuable to contribute. But gradually I found my voice. When I suggested reinforcing the eastern wall with a secondary barrier, he implemented it immediately. When I pointed out a weakness in the guard rotation schedule, he adjusted it without question. I was becoming part of this world in ways I'd never anticipated. One evening, I sat at the desk in our room composing a letter to my sister. The words flowed easily. Reassurances that I was safe, that Lawrence treated me well, that perhaps coming here hadn't been the disaster we'd both feared. I was reaching for the sealing wax when Lawrence entered. Writing to someone? His tone was casual, but I detected the undercurrent of curiosity. I instinctively covered the letter with my hand. Nobody important. He extended his palm. Show me. Panic flared in my chest. If he read this letter, if he saw me acknowledging my sister's existence and her supposed role in this marriage, would it somehow shatter the fragile understanding between us? You can't read it anyway, I said, trying to keep my voice light. No, he agreed, settling into the chair across from me. But your heartbeat just doubled, and your scent carries that sharp edge it gets when you're frightened. Which tells me this letter is about your res. I stopped trying to hide it. Of course he knew. He'd always known. Yes, she was supposed to be the one sitting here. Not me. I know. He leaned back, completely relaxed despite the bomb I'd just dropped. I've known from day one that you weren't the bride your family intended to send. My mouth went dry. Then why didn't you expose you? He finished my sentence with a slight smile. Execute you for fraud? Void the treaty and return you in disgrace? He paused, considering his words carefully, because I wanted to see if you'd eventually trust me enough to tell me yourself. If you'd choose honesty over fear. The letter crumpled slightly in my grip. I was terrified. I still am. He stood and moved around the desk, his hands finding my shoulders with that precision that no longer surprised me. I don't want your terror, Eli. I want your trust. I want you to look at me and see someone safe, instead of someone to hide from. His forehead touched mine and the gesture broke something inside me. Some last wall I'd been maintaining between who I was pretending to be and who I actually was. I'm a boy, I whispered, the words finally escaping after weeks of silence. I'm an Omega, yes. But my sister couldn't handle this marriage, so I took her place. I thought I could fake it for one night and disappear. I thought I could protect her and then go back to my old life. But then you happened. His hands slid from my shoulders to frame my face, thumbs tracing the line of my jaw. You think I didn't notice? Your scent is different from female Omegas. Sharper with notes of cedar and rain instead of flowers and honey. Your voice drops when you forget to maintain the performance. Your posture, your mannerisms, everything about you screamed male from the moment you walked into my hall. I pushed against his chest, motions overwhelming rational thought. Then why play along? Why let me keep pretending when you knew it was all fake? Because it wasn't fake. His voice remained calm, steady, an anchor in my storm. Your family sent me a political bride I didn't want. Instead, I got a brave Omega boy who threw himself into danger to save his sister, who stayed when he could have run, who patched my wounds after battle and sat beside me in the dark, without demanding anything in return. That person is real, Eli. More real than any arranged bride could ever be. Tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. I don't understand. Why would you want someone like me? I'm not what you needed. I'm not what anyone would choose. He pulled me up from the chair and into his arms, holding me against his chest where I could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady and alive. You're exactly what I choose. Not because of politics or treaties or family obligations, but because you're you, flawed and frightened and fierce and honest. Stay with me, Eli. Not as a bride, not as a disguise, but as yourself. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his scent and letting it calm the chaos in my mind. I'm scared, I admitted. Scared of what this means. Scared of how much I've come to care about you in such a short time. Good. His hand moved in slow circles on my back. Fear means it matters. Fear means you're not walking through life numb and disconnected. Feel the fear, Eli. Then choose to stay anyway. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in the candlelight. No more walls, no more performances, no more carefully maintained distance. Just two people who'd found something unexpected in the middle of a political arrangement neither had wanted. When we finally separated, I felt lighter somehow, as though speaking the truth aloud had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. What happens now? I asked. Lawrence smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Now we stop pretending. You stop wearing veils and feminine clothing unless you want to. You stop modulating your voice and hiding your natural mannerisms. You become exactly who you are. And we let everyone else adjust to that reality. They'll be scandalized. Let them be. He shrugged carelessly. I'm a blind warlord who rules through reputation and fear. If I say you're my chosen partner, nobody will dare question it. I laughed despite everything. Despite the uncertainty and the fear and the thousand complications still ahead of us. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. He pulled me close again, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Everything else is just noise. You and me, that's what matters. Everything else we'll figure out together. And standing there in our damaged room in his war-torn mansion, I believed him. Not because he promised easy answers or guaranteed happy endings, but because for the first time in my life, someone saw all of me, every flaw, every fear, every hidden piece, and chose to keep me anyway. That was worth more than any treaty, any political alliance, any carefully arranged marriage could ever be. Weeks passed and the mansion settled into a new rhythm. I stopped wearing the disguise entirely. My closet now held simple tunics and comfortable trousers instead of elaborate gowns. Lawrence's guards had been shocked at first when I appeared at breakfast dressed in masculine clothing, my hair unknotted and no veil in sight. But when Lawrence calmly introduced me as his official partner, not his bride, not his spouse, just his partner, they adapted surprisingly quickly. Nobody called me lady anymore. I was simply Eli, or occasionally Lord Eli from the more formal guards. My sister sent another letter, this one filled with relief and joy. She'd heard I was safe, that Lawrence treated me well, that the treaty remained intact despite my substitution. She apologized profusely for the burden she'd placed on me, for being too weak to fulfill her duty. I wrote back immediately explaining that I harbored no resentment. This choice, staying here building a life with Lawrence, had become mine rather than something forced upon me. For the first time in years I was genuinely happy. One evening, Lawrence found me on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He joined me silently, and I described the colors to him, how the light shifted from gold to crimson, how clouds caught fire along their edges, how the world seemed to glow with impossible beauty before darkness fell. His hand found mine on the stone railing. "Do you regret it? Coming here?" I studied our joined hands, his scarred from years of combat, mine still smooth but gaining calluses from the sword practice he'd been teaching me. No, not anymore. At first, yes. I regretted everything, the deception, the danger, the fear of being discovered. But now I squeezed his fingers gently. Now I understand these hands do more than wield weapons. They protect, they heal, they choose to be gentle when they could be violent. He rested his head on my shoulder and we stood there in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The intimacy of the moment struck me, how far we'd come from that first terrifying night when every word felt like walking through a minefield. "There's something I need to tell you." His voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. "What is it?" He turned to face me fully, his blind eyes somehow still managing to find mine. "I'm not completely blind, Eli. Not anymore." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I lost my vision 3 years ago in battle. Poison on an enemy blade that destroyed the nerves. The healer said it was permanent." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But lately things have been changing. I'm starting to see shapes, shadows, movement. Not clearly, not enough to read or recognize faces, but enough to know when someone enters a room, enough to track your outline when you move." I grabbed his face between my palms, searching his expression for signs of deception. "You can see me?" His hands covered mine, holding them against his cheeks. "Partially. I see your silhouette, the way your hair catches light, how you gesture when you talk. And I think," he smiled, rare expression that transformed him from fearsome warlord to someone almost vulnerable, "I think I like what I see." Tears blurred my vision. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I don't want secrets between us anymore. You showed me your truth. All of it, even the parts you were terrified to reveal. I owe you the same honesty." His thumbs brushed across my neck. "My vision is returning slowly. In a few months, maybe a year, I might see you completely, and I wanted you to know before it happened, so you'd understand that I didn't choose you because I couldn't see you. I chose you knowing exactly who you are." I pulled him into a kiss, our first real kiss, without pretense or performance or fear. Just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and decided to stay. His lips moved against mine with surprising gentleness, as though I were something precious that might break if handled roughly. When we separated, both of us breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "You're not my tribute, Eli. You're not a political arrangement or a treaty obligation or a replacement for someone else. You're my deliberate choice, the person I want beside me, not because I have to, but because I choose to, and you're mine." The words came out as a whisper, but they carried all the weight of a vow. My choice, my partner, my home. We held each other as stars began appearing overhead, marking the transition from day to night. The mansion around us had been damaged and repaired, attacked and defended, but it remained standing, just like us, battered by circumstances but still intact, still choosing to stay, still building something worth protecting. What do we do now? I asked eventually. Lawrence laughed quietly. Now we keep living. We train together, plan together, face whatever comes together. We write our own story instead of following the script others wrote for us. That sounds terrifying. It is. He kissed my temple softly. But the best things usually are. We returned inside as the night grew cold. Hands still intertwined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be political fallout from our unconventional arrangement. Rival clans who still opposed our alliance. 1,000 complications we hadn't yet anticipated. But none of that mattered in this moment. Because somewhere between deception and truth, between fear and trust, between a blind alpha and a disguised omega, we'd created something neither of us had expected. Not a treaty marriage bound by duty. Not a political alliance maintained through necessity, but a genuine partnership built on choice, honesty, and the kind of courage that comes from showing someone your whole self and trusting they'll stay. As we prepared for bed that night, me in my comfortable clothes, Lawrence in his simple tunic, both of us finally free to be ourselves, I realized this was what I'd been searching for without knowing it. Not safety or security or even acceptance, but belonging. The feeling that I'd found the one place in the world where I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to perform, didn't have to be anything other than exactly who I was. And as Lawrence pulled me close, his arm draped protectively over my waist, I understood that the best bonds aren't the ones forced by circumstance or arranged by families or demanded by tradition. The best bonds are the ones we choose to forge ourselves. Messy and imperfect and absolutely worth fighting for. This was ours, and nothing would take it away.